Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel, Empowerment Through Capital. We're here today with our guests from the Indigenous Growth Fund. I know a lot of people are very curious about the Indigenous Growth Fund. It's a very new, very hot topic right now in the Indigenous entrepreneurial community. Today with me, I have a few guests who are going to be able to provide us with a lot of great information. I'm really looking forward to this. We have Shannin Metatawabin, who is CEO of the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association. We have Alison Nankivell, who is Vice President, Senior Fund Investments and Global Scaling at BDC Capital. And we have Frank Richter, Managing Director of the Indigenous Growth Fund. So thank you all for being here. My name is Frank Busch. I am the CEO and co-founder of NationFUND Access Capital Corporation. I work directly with First Nations communities to assist them in getting ready to do major projects or to look at how to access capital directly from the capital markets. So maybe get into some backgrounds here. We'll start with Shannin. So as I said, Shannin is CEO of NACCA. He is Cree from Fort Albany First Nation of the Muskegawak Nation. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Carleton University and an Aboriginal Economic Development Certificate from the University of Waterloo. He previously served as the Executive Director of the Ontario First Nations Technical Services Corporation and the Manager of Aboriginal Affairs and Sustainability with De Beers Canada. Shannin and his wife Sienna of the White Bear Sakamay First Nation in Saskatchewan reside in Ottawa with their 4 children. Alison is Senior Vice President, Fund Investments and Global Scaling. She's based in Toronto. She leads the Business Development Canada's capital team of indirect investments, Canada's largest venture fund investor, with investments in more than 90 funds and more than 1 billion in assets under management. She's bringing over 25 years of experience in the finance industry in Canada and Asia. Alison is also responsible for BDC Capital's cross-border venture strategy, helping connect large corporates and investors in Asia with high-potential Canadian companies and vice versa. Alison holds a Bachelor of Arts in Commerce and Economics from the University of Toronto and a Master's in Public Administration and Public Policy from the London School of Economics and Political Science. She also holds the Chartered Financial Analyst designation. Welcome, Alison. And last but not least, we have Frank Richter. Frank brings experience in social finance, impact lending, business intelligence, and economic policy. Frank completed his bachelor's and master's degrees focusing on business, finance, and economic policy in both. Prior to joining NACCA, Frank worked with the Community Forward Fund, a loan fund specializing in lending to nonprofits, where he worked on loan portfolio reporting and delivered training and consulting on analyzing nonprofit financial statements. Thank you all for being here. Shannin, why don't we start with you? Why don't you say hello to the Indigenomics crowd?
Hello, everybody, and thanks for participating again. I'm really happy to be back. It's probably my 3rd Indigenomics conference, and I'm glad to see that the participation rate continues to increase, because that shows that we're getting a lot more allies helping Indigenous people with the empowerment and the reclaiming of our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Alison, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, just thank you, Frank. Delighted to be here. It's my first time at the conference. I'm really much in a learning mode, but absolutely delighted to be here and be part of whatever we can bring as BDC and BDC Capital, the part of the bank I work for, to contribute to the economic empowerment and the support of the Indigenous community in Canada.
Great to have you, Alison. Frank Richter, care to say hello?
Hello, happy to be here as well. Really glad to have been invited to the Indigenomics conference. I've watched the Indigenomics work over the last year unfold, and I'm really happy to see all the different people and ideas that it's bringing together and that impact that it's having. Looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's jump right in. I'm sure our viewers are pretty excited to hear all the details. So we'll start with Shannin. Maybe just give some background. What exactly is the Indigenous Growth Fund?
I think the Growth Fund is a culmination of ongoing work to try to find options for access to capital. We've always had a problem with accessing capital. We've had systemic barriers placed in front of us. Some of our members, we have 59 members from coast to coast to coast with the NACCA network, and each one of them has leveraged what they can to try to access capital. So we needed to find an option and a tool at a larger scale to access larger tranches of investment. So this is a tool that allows the investment community to participate in economic reconciliation. The investors were asking for a tool so that they can participate, and the market was searching for a tool. And you remember when we attended the Harvard program, was it 4 years ago now, Frank? And that's kind of where they talked a lot about funds and the equity markets and their search for finding a return on investment, and it was getting harder and harder to do globally. So the Indigenous community is essentially an untapped market source. And if we could provide more tools for the investment community to help the Indigenous economic reclamation projects, then this is what we wanted to do. And this is not a new concept. It was talked about in the 90s, but I think that in today's marketplace, with the allies that we have, with the conversations that are going on with Indigenous reconciliation, the time was just right that this was able to work. And this conversation that we're going to have today is going to talk about that process of how we got through this initial planning, and now we're going to be talking about implementation of this. But this is a tool that raises capital. It's perpetual access, and that's been the thing that we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a closed fund, but it's going to be an open fund that allows continual growth, investors to enter and exit, and it's a recognition of including Indigenous people into the economy, into the global economy, essentially. Thank you.
So, I guess, maybe just in follow up to that, so those, First Nations, entrepreneurs, and economic entities, and that they don't have to see this as something that's kind of a one and done. Like, I think we've seen those types of programs come out with mixed success. So what you're telling us here really is that it's something that's going to be accessible over the long term. Like, this is really here to stay.
Yeah, our members have been asking us to bring capital, and when I was brought on as CEO, the one priority that they gave me is we need capital, so make that happen. So through our discussions with government and seeing that wasn't an option for capital access, and that's generally historically been the source that everybody looks for. But because the global marketplace has so much capital, it's just a matter of connecting that capital to our community, development of a fund that enables larger and larger tranches of access to capital, so that our communities that have had problems accessing capital and opportunities are lost because of the lack of that capital, now more communities are able to do planning, take advantage of opportunities within their homelands, with the knowledge that capital is going to be more readily available, and that they will have the capacity to be able to connect that capital to their community.
Awesome. So Frank, who is eligible to access the fund?
So the fund is really designed to provide loan capital to small and medium-sized enterprises. And that's the same client group, essentially, that the Aboriginal Financial Institutions have been serving for the last 30 years. As Shannin has said, that there has been a need for additional capital to support small Indigenous businesses for quite a while. There has not been much movement on the federal government side to provide capital through the traditional funding mechanisms that are available. And the Indigenous Growth Fund now leverages investments in a new way from the federal government as well as Crown corporations, so that the Aboriginal financial institutions can support more and so also larger projects of small and medium-sized enterprises across Canada.
So we're saying basically both kind of new opportunities that entrepreneurs and economic entities are undertaking, but also for existing companies to kind of try to get to the next level.
That's right. So it can be both new startup companies as well as existing enterprises. They can be privately owned, they can be community owned. And what we've seen is that the size and complexity of the projects that that businesses come with to the AFIs have grown, and the AFIs with their existing capital stock and balance sheets have not been able to support that kind of growth. So we want to be able to provide capital to those enterprises, and those are enterprises in a variety of industries. So we're not industry specific. It could be anything from fishing, it could be manufacturing, it could be construction, it could be in the resource sector, it could be services businesses for that matter. So a wide array of industries that we can support through this. And at the end of the day, it's the local Aboriginal financial institution that makes the funding decisions within parameters to those enterprises.
So the flow of capital then, it's through the Indigenous Growth Fund will raise the money on the capital markets and then use the AFIs to basically facilitate the flow of the capital to the entrepreneurs and economic entities.
That's correct. So we won't be funding the businesses directly, but it's the AFIs that make the decisions on the loans. So from a client perspective or from an entrepreneur perspective, it's that they would talk to an AFI, submit an application, and then it's the AFI that adjudicates the application for the entrepreneur. From our end, from the IGF perspective, we provide some guardrails and criteria that the AFI has to adhere to in the process, but it's really that the relationship at the end of the day is between the AFI and the business client.
Okay, so and then in terms of like timing, the recipient or the entrepreneur, they're not kind of applying to both the AFI and the Indigenous Growth Fund. Is that correct?
That's correct. So from the client perspective, it's not a separate process from a regular application to an AFI for a loan. It would look at the end of the day very similar to the application process they would run through right now. What's new now is that many AFIs later on this year will have access to much more capital. So we know from our members that over the years, they've seen many more clients in the community that they could support, but many of them have, for example, not gone out and actively advertised their services because they just knew they didn't have the capital and support resources available to support more clients. And now we're hoping that they can reach out to more clients, and more clients can benefit from the financing that AFIs offer to Indigenous businesses.
So now the entrepreneurs they're not having to worry about how skinny their slice of pie is here. You're kind of telling me that you guys have built a much bigger pie here.
That's right. That's the idea. We want to remove that constraint. So if you look back at the history of the AFI network, they were capitalized by government contributions of around initially $240 million in the 80s and 90s. And in many regions of the country, that money that's originally been allocated, it kept recycling it to new loans, but the number of loans that could be funded through that capital really has been quite constrained and limited in many regions and communities. So now we're hoping that more entrepreneurs can benefit from that type of developmental lending.
Awesome. Thank you, Frank. Alison, maybe I'll get a little bit more technical with you. I'm sure the viewers want to know kind of where is this money coming from? Like what's going on here, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about how the fund is structured?
Yeah, no, happy to do that, Frank. As Shannin pointed out, it's a unique fund in the sense that a few things. First of all, it's institutional quality, which means that it's operating at a scale that institutional investors can participate because, institutional investors generally like to be able to put large contributions of capital, anywhere from 5 million up. And the fund is structured, as Shannin said, as an evergreen fund, meaning it has no end of life. It just continues to go on and on. So investors can come into the fund, stay for a certain period of time, and then later, if they wish to exit, they can, you know, make the fund manager, which is IGF, aware of that and have a scheduled way of departing over time from the fund. I think what's unique about the fund is, first of all, it is more complex to have set up an institutional quality evergreen fund of this type. But what's really unique about it is we have these different classes of investors in the fund. So when we talk about investors, we're not necessarily talking about at this point, you know, short-term, you know, capital market type providers. We're talking about, you know, pension funds who want to come in and have a long-term commitment. Banks who may wish to be part of economic reconciliation and to make a contribution to a fund of this type. Groups like ourselves, Business Development Bank of Canada, the Crown corporations in Canada, who want to be part of the economic empowerment of the Indigenous community, and also play a key role in trying to have new, more diverse fund managers out there, as we're seeing with the formation of IGF. So there's a lot of different types of institutional investors. And of course, it would be endowments, community foundations, all kinds of these groups who are long-term investors who wish to take an ownership in the fund by investing, holding that for a period of time, anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 years, depending on their appetite. And then, you know, allowing their capital to be used to be on lent, as Frank pointed out, through the IGF structure. So what's interesting, as I mentioned, is this different classes of shares. The private sector is one class of shares. We call them Class C. There's the Crown corporations, which are Business Development Bank of Canada, Export Development Canada, and also Farm Credit Corporation, are all participating in the fund. And we are a Class B shares because we're kind of a different distinction as being, you know, quasi-government type organizations in the fund. And then we have the federal government itself who is invested in the fund, and they are a Class A share. And the interesting thing is these different classes of shares all have different economic rights in the fund. The key thing to remember is private sector investors have significant downside protection and have a return of capital that is quite consistent to them in the form of interest payments that are evergreen, you know, continue as the loans are made to the underlying Indigenous SMEs, and the AFIs are paying interest payments back to the fund. Those travel on to the private sector. The unique thing is we structured the fund to give the fund manager, IGF, which is a subsidiary of NACCA, growth and ownership of the fund over time. And the way we did that is to take a portion of the interest payments that would come to the Crown corporations and all of the interest payments that would normally go to the federal government, and we transfer them over time to the fund manager. And the fund manager then reinvests them in the fund. So then the fund continues to grow. And the reason we do this is because it's a way for the fund manager to, over time, have a growing sense of ownership in the fund. And then over time, it creates a permanent source of capital that NACCA has to on-lend into the Indigenous SME community. So it's a really innovative structure. I think that speaks well to the ability of people sitting around a table with a blank piece of paper to kind of put something new together that has that social aspect. And I think that's what's going to be attractive about it for private sector institutional investors, is they see that it's not just about investing in a fund for return. It's creating, by the structure of the fund, genuine economic empowerment of NACCA and, you know, the underlying Indigenous AFIs by growing over time their collective ownership of this capital that will continue to recycle and be reused by them as they continue to lend it on to the SME community. So I think that's really worthwhile and a unique thing that we've done that maybe looks a little different than's been done in the past in some funds.
Yeah, and just in my travels and my conversations with First Nations, it's kind of difficult for them at times because we haven't had a lot of interaction or experience with kind of the large institutional investors. In terms of like time horizon of investment and return expectations, maybe just tell us a little bit about those types of investors and how they're different from maybe kind of the richest guy in a small town with a couple million to throw around versus, you know, the big funds and pension plans with literally billions of dollars to work with.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. I mean, I think as we start out, we've done a first close of the fund. We announced a first close at $150 million, but this fund can grow up to $250 million in size with additional participation of new investors coming in over time. I think that we expect there to be, from the private side, quite a different collection of investors coming in. There have been people who will probably be smaller endowments who maybe only want to contribute $1 million or a couple of million because they make smaller contributions. But as you say, there could be pension funds who are wanting to contribute significantly larger amounts. Our contribution as BDC was 50 million into the fund. We had 50 million from the federal government, 35 from Export Development Canada, and then 15 million from Farm Credit Corporation. So, as institutions, were writing larger checks to kind of create the foundation and the base of that fund. But over time, we expect other groups to come in, and it'll be at all different levels. And I actually expect over time, there should be potential even for there to be a retail element. I mean, I think when you have a long-term fund, we expect there to be innovation and growth in how this fund evolves over time. And we've created enough flexibility in the structure of the fund to allow that. So, over time, I can imagine there being mechanisms where we can pool, high net worth or retail institutional investor interest that could potentially come in as part of the private sector participation, working through a bank or some other intermediary. But we do believe at the beginning of the life of the fund, which will be, the first, say, 10 to 15 years of the fund in an evergreen structure, we'll see more institutional investors who kind of have longer time horizons, because we really want investors coming in to take the time to be a participant and contribute to, as I said, that economic empowerment of the fund. So for ourselves as Crown corporations, we have a long-term horizon, 15 years or so as we invest in funds. The government is investing with that kind of long-term horizon as well. I think some of the private sector investors who are coming in, maybe their time horizon's closer to 5 years, 10 years, but that's the strength of having all these different kinds of investors all in the fund at the same time, is we all have different time horizons and we all have different areas that we can contribute to the fund in terms of our expectations for return and our ability to take on certain levels of risk, because the risk element is protected much more for the private sector's investors from the government taking more of the downside risk, right, to protect and guarantee the level of return that's coming to the private sector. And I think that's the strength of the fund, is we're using the I guess the economic levers of government to create a cushioning effect to de-risk the fund, to allow the private sector to come in alongside the government and the Crown corporations in a very important, as Shannin so eloquently put, kind of, exercise of economic empowerment to give capital where it's needed back to the Indigenous communities where so much growth is happening now.
Well, that's really innovative, and this kind of been the focus of most of my career, is how do you bridge the divide between capital markets and the band office, basically, right? On the grassroots kind of First Nations people trying to develop. Aside from the obvious kind of social impact benefits, which some of the viewers might be surprised to hear that these large corporations with billions of dollars actually care about. That's always something I surprise people with when I talk to them. But the fact of the matter really is that it actually does make good business sense. I've always described First Nations as an emerging market within a first world country. Is that kind of the messaging you're getting from the capital markets?
I mean, absolutely. I think one of the things that was also, I think, said very well at the beginning by Shannin was this issue of the markets are looking for a product, right? And we really wanted to use our efforts as of our fund investments team within BDC Capital to help create a product, because with the right product in the market, there's huge demand for institutional investors to access the opportunity to help Indigenous communities. And it's just been really hard to do up to now because there wasn't a product in the market. It takes time to put it in place, getting something with the right governance structure, with the right reporting structure, and all of those things that, institutional investors need to see to be able to participate. So we feel that we've kind of created what we think is a template that others can now follow to come into the market that will tap even more capital from the institutional investors, because they do want to have true, you know, social and economic impact. They do see it as a question of justice. And I think most organizations, not just the Crown corporations, want to step up in terms of the, you know, environmental, social governance, ESG, as we call it, right? Those are important elements for all of us as investors. And I think that by putting really well-structured products of this type in the market that connect a community that needs capital and has the ability to really grow with additional capital to investors who, as you said before yourself, Frank, are, you know, have lots of capital, we're putting those two pieces together. I mean, I think it's you know, that's a great combination, and we absolutely be seeing more of that in future in the market.
Awesome. Thank you, Alison. So I'm going to go back to Shannin here. You know, I'm going to, you know, do some of the Cree fun stuff with you here, just between us Crees, because you know, as you're well aware, you know, some people are going to be watching this going, yeah, heard all this before, been through this, been through that, and unfortunately, you know, we have been through quite a few kind of these types of new things that come out, and they're rather short-lived or they don't work. So how is the IGF different from a typical government program?
Well, I think that a government program is essentially a standard approach to how government and the financial system deals with Indigenous people. It's program by program. So everybody's used to submitting a proposal and identifying that there's some money available in this area. So let's get ready for it. Let's plan for it. But we know we've been doing this for 35 years through the Aboriginal Financial Institution Network. I've deployed myself and helped 250 businesses as a development officer in my career, and I've always viewed myself as an empowermenter, an economic empowermenter is what I call myself, because you don't get more joy than seeing an Indigenous person starting a business and providing that financial resources to enable them to start that business. Now, one of our members did a social impact study that showed that for every loan, there's an increase in health indicators of 19.9%, mental health indicators of 52%, and life satisfaction of 72%. Those are figures that show that it's not only helping and empowering, but it's also as far as a social impact. It's impacting not only that individual, but a whole community. And Frank right now, he can talk about this, but he's taken that further to do a national study with the conference board on a social impact. This is going to help our growth fund in understanding the impact so that the investors will know what their money is doing in the Indigenous community. And this is a very important element, that we have created this fund with the BDC. So Frank and Alison working hand in hand, working through the ups and downs of creating this fund. This wasn't created by the government. This was done by Indigenous and the investment bank. And this is our tool. We have ownership. This is new. This is not one-off program that the government has right now, though. We've got some certainty here. Now we can plan from this. We can grow from this. What you might not know is that the AFI network has had lending criteria that has not changed in 30 years. They haven't had access to capital to enable them to make their loans a little bit bigger, to help more complex businesses, to get into certain industries. But now they have that opportunity to take the glasses off and say, okay, what's the opportunity in this world? They can stop saying no to entrepreneurs because they're trying to manage the size of their capital bank account. They now have access to more capital, so now they can help every entrepreneur that approaches them. So this is accessing the private sector to the community. This is open, it's continual growth, and it, like Alison said, this is a template. We have needs in the housing sector, so getting into mortgages. We have needs in the community for major projects. This is a template for creating a major projects fund, and transitioning to a new economy in the renewable sector. This allows us to maybe share this template with a renewable energy fund as well. So we did not just start a business development fund to act for entrepreneurs. This is the template for the Indigenous community, and this is what we want to share today. Thank you.
So if there is, say, an election this year, next year, the year after, and say a new political party comes to power, because the relationship is really between the capital markets and the First Nations via NACCA and the AFI network, you know, when you talk about evergreen fund, this is not something that a new government could come in and turn off. Is that basically kind of also what you're saying?
Yeah, no, the official close was in April, and this was for sure 150 million has launched this fund, and now we have access to invite investors into this for the second tranche. So this is very much a tool that is off to the races.
So when you see this initial 150 million, are you thinking like, wow, 150 mil, we hit our goal? Or do you see this as kind of more of a seed to grow a great tree here?
That's exactly the way I'd say it.
Yeah.
A seed to grow a great tree.
Oh, awesome. Wonderful. Okay, so, you know, Alison, and maybe I'll get Frank's perspective as well, just through your process that working together, you know, to, you know, kind of, I'm sure you had to climb through just a web of red tape to make this happen, but maybe tell us a little bit about some of the barriers that you overcame to make the Indigenous Growth Fund a reality. Maybe Frank, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. And I think it ties well into the discussion we just had, comparing the fund to a traditional government program. And I think you hit all the important points. If I compare the IGF to, you know, some of the other government traditional contribution programs that NACCA is also delivering, the difference really is in that we were able to sit down with BDC and government departments to structure this fund. I mean, there were, you know, needs on all sides that we had to fulfill, but I think it brought together the understanding from NACCA side, understanding what the needs are in the business and economic development community, and on the BDC side, the knowledge of what institutional investors are looking for. And I think Alison's team has really been excellent in coming up with, you know, innovative and solutions to, you know, between the two of us trying to square the two needs. And if I look at other government programs, as you said, they can always be canceled with the next election. And this one is something that cannot be canceled in the next election. We now have a tool that, by virtue of all the limited partners signing their agreements, that we have great certainty that the money will be available and we'll be able to draw down on the $150 million, even if there are changes in the political leadership over the next years. And also, we have been able to structure a fund that will continue to, or could live independently because of that equity stake that NACCA as the fund manager is growing in the fund, and that will stay in the fund as long as the fund is around for the next decades to come. So that's really quite different. And putting all that together took a lot of time. I don't know why, but somehow we always ended up having meetings almost every week, late Friday afternoon. They always ran late, but I think we actually got a lot done in those meetings. It was a long process. It took a year and a half. I mean, there was COVID in there that delayed things, but even without COVID, I think because there's so many new aspects to this fund, it just took a long time to work through that and make sure that at the end of the day, we have a model that works financially. We have a model that works from the AFI and Indigenous entrepreneur perspective. We have a model that is appealing to institutional investors. So there are a lot of pieces that we build in right from the get-go: due diligence, governance, reporting, that should be appealing, we hope, to institutional investors, and will make it easy to access institutional capital. So it's not been easy, but I think, you know, we came up with a really good model, and what we're seeing now is a lot of interest from other indigenous funds, but also more broadly, you know, I'm looking at the social finance fund that there was a recommitment from the federal government to work on that. In the social finance community, there's a lot of interest trying to learn about the IGF, because we're really a front runner in many ways. And they're trying to learn about how we structured the fund, what the reporting will look like, because we by virtue of the scale of the fund, which is much larger than most other social finance initiatives in Canada, you know, we have to be a bit ahead of the curve. So there's a lot of interest across the board in, you know, what came out of 1.5 years of you know, tweaking, negotiating back and forth. And again, I think having the two sides involved has been really instrumental. On NACCA on the one side, understanding the needs in the community, and on the other hand, BDC are really coming in with their knowledge of how funds work and how we could structure this to be attractive to private and especially institutional investors.
Oh, awesome. Alison, what are some of the barriers you found in the way that you had to work through or break through to make this happen?
Well, I think Frank expressed them eloquently, and probably the most useful one to keep in mind is, as he said, those late Friday meetings, because I think what we had to do first and foremost was build trust on both sides, right? I think it was very interesting to start a dynamic where there was to have it conveyed that we're not the government as BDC, the Crown, we're a Crown corporation. And I remember distinctly having this conversation of saying, you know, my job, if our fund investments team at BDC Capital, you know, we're part of a larger BDC that's all about reaching access to all entrepreneurs, you know, especially underserved entrepreneurs in a country. And that definitely includes, you know, Indigenous entrepreneurs. But in my team, we work a lot with new managers, like first-time fund managers. And our job is to help you be good at your job, right? That's what we were there to do, is to sit down and say, okay, what is it you're trying to build? How, you know, how would that work with the institutional investor community, as Frank said? So how should we think about structuring that? And just having those conversations to make clear that it was, we're in this together, we're building this together, and build that trust was really important to take the time to do, you know, because this isn't a government program. Like we're trying to help you build something that's got permanent capabilities to go on and bring be a, you know, continuous channel of capital into the Aboriginal financial institutions and onwards into, you know, the Indigenous entrepreneur community. And I think so getting that sort of that sense of, you know, we're all kind of coming with the right attitude to the table was, I think, the key thing. And then, like Frank said, I mean, we were starting with a blank piece of paper. We had to create something that didn't exist before. So that took time, as Frank said, to understand what are the needs in the community. And of course, we had no concept of that. So we needed to be educated by NACCA about what those needs were, how, you know, how the fund needed to work to be reflective of the desire of NACCA to, you know, empower and grow the capital access of its underlying AFIs over time. So that's why we came up with an evergreen fund. And, you know, that's why we thought about, okay, well, how do we grow the ownership of NACCA in this fund? Well, you know, that's when we came up with the innovation of transferring a certain amount of interest payments over that NACCA would reinvest in the fund and grow their ownership. Because, you know, those are all the steps along the way of understanding what the objectives are and then adjusting and, you know, creating a fund to meet those. So I think, you know, that back and forth was really important. And, you know, as Frank said, I think just getting the mechanisms of setting up a fund is, you know, people think it's like, you know, it's easy, like it's just a transaction, like a, you know, one-off loan. It's not. We're building, you know, NACCA has built a new business here. They have now a fund management business that they're setting up. They have a team. They have to do reporting, as Frank said, that's going to be at a certain level that institutional investors expect from financial reporting, as well as the, you know, social impact reporting. And they are making, you know, huge innovations and inroads in setting precedents for how to do this that others will follow. You know, I think it's, and that collaboration about what is it that we need to see how it should look like, how can we help you in that sort of issue of reporting and giving you a sense of what we think is important to highlight, what's not. That's all part of setting up those systems that allow, NACCA as through the IGF to be, as I said, a truly institutional grade fund that can go on and set that precedent and set that standards that other people can follow. And through that exercise, which I think is that we've come to, I mean, there's just one thing I'll just highlight here, which is that, I think it's incredibly important when we look at the investor community. This is, to my knowledge, the first really at scale, as Frank said, social finance fund of its type in Canada, and the first one of any kind, and it happens to be fully Indigenous run, right? I think that's a huge testimony that this is a step forward in, Indigenously owned fund management company being in the investor community, running an institutional size fund in an area that's like, just starting to develop, and the first at scale fund is being done, with NACCA. I mean, I think that's huge credit to NACCA and to, the purpose of the fund, which I believe really will attract investors, because they just see it as Shannin alluded to before. There's this underlying economic, great need in the market, great entrepreneurs who aren't being sourced with capital. You'd be crazy as an institutional investor not to want to be involved in trying to channel capital that. And now as I said before, we've got a mechanism to do it. So, I mean, I think really when we look at about challenges, it was just about taking the time to learn from each other, build the trust, and then have the flexibility of mind to create something from scratch that really did meet the needs of what we're all trying to do here.
Well, thank you. And, I'm just Shannin, I don't know, just Alison and Frank were talking there. I kind of went back to thinking about some of the conversations you and I and others had when we were at Harvard in that program. I remember kind of just having very early discussions that probably eventually led to this. But just for our viewers, like, how many raised eyebrows did you get when you started talking about this idea or this concept of developing a fund for First Nations entrepreneurs and actually going to Wall Street and Bay Street to get the money? Like, did you, how did that process work? Was it kind of well received, or did you see a lot of this?
Well, I think when you're creating something new and something historically new, you're going to have a lot of raised eyebrows. You're going to have a lot of interest. You're going to have a lot of nodding of the heads. It's like, oh, you're so cute, but we know that the market is screaming for this right now. The conversations around equity and our social indicators being a third world within a first world is the ESG that Alison talked about is big. It's big for the mining sector, but not so much for the financial sector or corporate Canada. It's just a matter of time before they get caught up, and I think they are caught up now. Shareholders, investment are now going to be using that lens to look at their investment into a company. So that company now has a different filter in which to look at how they operate. And by including Indigenous within the prosperity of Canada is good business sense. When we went to Harvard, I had already envisioned that I was going to do this, and by going there and learning more about the funds, we sat down with Michael Denham shortly after, and we had at that initial meeting an understanding that we both wanted this. BDC had some needs to expand their market into the Indigenous community. We have 35 years under our belt of deploying through our members. So we have a know-how of getting the capital into the hands of the people that need it. We just don't have the capital. So there's a good relationship there to be had. And we've had a number of meetings over the years now where we've always made sure that we recommit to the process. And Michael Denham is now leaving BDC. And this was one of we met actually in December, where we said, okay, we got to ramp it up more Friday night meetings, just get this thing done by March 31st. And that's our deadline. And we had a good commitment as the two CEOs to make sure that our technical team worked day and night to get this done so that we can see this done, because the time is right, the need is there, and this is historically something that's going to perpetually be in place. So I think everybody had that commitment. Definitely Alison is very committed. She's been so helpful. Her capacity is next to none, and Frank has learned so much, and he's got so much experience. Between the two of them, they got this done. And you know, every once in a while they had to deal with the lawyers, but that's just the hurdles that you have to go through to make sure that it gets done. And I'm so happy that we got there.
Well, that's awesome. Maybe just going a little macro and kind of building on that, you know, how does connecting private capital to the Indigenous community, you know, help with the reconciliation efforts?
I think it's the highest form of reconciliation that you can have. Indigenous people before contact, we didn't know what poverty was. We were rich in what we understood to be rich. We had trade. We had everything that we needed. We had communities. We had tens of millions of people. And I say this today, we had 100 million people on this land before settlement, and you know, 95% of us were wiped out. So our land looked empty, and you know, there's science behind that. But we were rich, so we're basically reclaiming our place in the economy. And I tell this to government. I've been on 3 Senate committees and House Standing Committee, where I say that in order for Canada to be prosperous in the future, Indigenous people also need to be prosperous. We have 275 court cases that affirm our rights and title to the lands. It was taken from us, but we have treaties. We have original rights to the land. So you need to work with us. United Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People talks about that. In order for Canada to be prosperous, Indigenous people now need some attention. And this fund is that first step to show that we are creating a tool. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be taking advantage of more opportunities. And this is just the first step of many funds that'll allow us to participate actively and achieve what Carol Ann always talks about, was this $100 billion target and opportunity. You know, 5% of the GDP would be what, $80 billion. $100 billion is a good first goal. But I think we have the opportunity and the people and the growth in our population to add a lot more to Canada's prosperity. Thank you.
You know, and maybe just for our non-Indigenous viewers, because I find I've had a lot of those types of conversations, and you know, sometimes they're kind of surprised to hear that, you know, First Nations people, Indigenous people want Canada to be a prosperous country. You know, and I think that takes people by surprise in that, you know, because maybe there's this mentality that because of historical wrongs in that there's this attitude amongst non-Indigenous people that First Nations want to pull them down somehow or replace them. You know, what are your conversations in the community been like that?
Well, I think there's always an underlying fear from the settler community that's what Indigenous people want, and I don't think that's a well-placed fear, because you know, I have 4 kids. I want them to be prosperous in the future, and I'm here, and I feel that I am a tool as well that is here to create empowerment and to create tools like the Indigenous Growth Fund to ensure that our future generations are successful. And that's kind of why I'm here. That's why I know, Frank, that you're here. You've got the same goals as me to ensure that we're connecting capital to our community, that we're taking advantage of all the opportunities that are there, and we're gonna teach anybody that wants to be taught about how to do this. I work with communities on their remedial management plans when they're getting out of problems to becoming more financially secure. These are just the steps that we have to go through. The First Nation Financial Authority, they provide capital for infrastructure. So we're putting the right tools in place to ensure the long-term sustainability of our community. And I think we're at the beginning, but we're going to continue to grow. We're just breaking trail.
Absolutely. So Frank, just, maybe just as a citizen, as a Canadian, working on this project, obviously there's probably a bit of a learning curve to learn a bit about the Indigenous community in that, but how did it make you feel to be able to bring something like this to, to the Canadian kind of investment environment?
It was really a great experience to develop this fund and seeing the impacts that I think it will have. I've worked with NACCA for 5 years and talked to a lot of people in the network, and I know that there's a great need that is unmet. And I think what the theme of this conference is, and what Carol Ann Hilton talks about a lot, is to look at some positive impacts that you can have, to look at a positive story, and then, as Shannin said, the prosperity that can be created here, and helping with creating that prosperity has been quite good experience, and really honored to be able to be part of this this team, to have put this fund in place.
Awesome, thank you. And Alison, I know from from some Googling there that you've had as a major part of your career, matching Canada with Asian markets and trying to bring some of that global money back to Canada. Like, how does it make you feel as a citizen to basically be doing the same kind of work but in your own backyard, so to speak?
I have to say, Frank, I think that this is probably the most rewarding project I have ever worked on in my career. I say that with full humility. It's been a learning process on my side. It's been a great intellectual exercise to collaborate with everybody, on the NACCA team, with Shannin and Frank and the rest of the NACCA crew, to build something from scratch and build something new. And I think it's highly important, as you've all said, to create a better economic future, so that we don't have third world country conditions in communities in Canada within a first world nation. I particularly am quite passionate about ESG, those kinds of issues, because I actually sit in an international institutional investor community board called the Institutional Limited Partners Association, which is a global association of global pension funds from all over the world. And the things that we're talking about are the things that Shannon's mentioned. Institutional investors all over the world want their capital to be used in a way that creates and helps with economic justice, that helps with social impact. This is a huge concern. And to be able to, be involved in something that contributes to my own country as a Canadian, I mean, it's a real privilege to be part of that. And, I think it shows that from the BDC side, that is core to our mandate. We want to help empower entrepreneurs everywhere, but we also want to work with key partners like NACCA to ensure that we are creating mechanisms to allow people to self-realize, to develop the economic, opportunities that they're fully capable of doing with just the right capital available to them. So, I can't think of anything. I mean, I've worked on all kinds of deals of different kinds all over the world, and I still think that this is probably, certainly the most stimulating and certainly the most rewarding from a social purpose perspective. And, I would take any late Friday night meetings again to work on anything with NACCA. It's always been a pleasure working with them.
Well, that's awesome. Okay, so and obviously, it's part of a kind of a greater discussion around kind of access to capital. So I wonder, maybe Shannin, just kind of, what's really kind of the difference and similarities to some of the other fund opportunities out there? Like obviously a lot of Indigenous entrepreneurs are, kind of having to shop around, so they're going to say, well, I've got this great idea. I can go to a bank, I can go to an AFI, I can look for a government program of some kind. What do you think the current environment looks like today for the entrepreneur?
Well, I think we're just at the beginning of the options being created for economic development and business development in Canada for Indigenous people. There are a couple of funds out there, yours included, that provide capital for different purposes. They have different risks associated with it. I think the AFI network, I think we classify 85% of our loans go to 5 people and less. So it's kind of like a micro and a small business. We've never had the capital to assist the larger type of businesses, something that would really make a social impact in a community. But now we're filling that need because the mainstream lenders were banks. So when one of our members did that social impact study, 50% of the participants of that study had already received a no by a bank. So that systemic discrimination that exists in the financial sector still exists. So we still need options, and the AFIs is a good option for a business starting and expanding, and a lot of the tourism businesses in Canada were supported by the AFI network, and so it's actively ingrained in a lot of the communities because they have deep social connections. Every AFI has watched everybody grow up in that community. They know everybody. They know the leaders. They know, the local municipalities. They're very well connected, so they make good business decisions. Repayments in the AFI network is higher than 97%, which is probably the highest in the world. As we have more capital, we may take more risks. Maybe that'll be more on par with what's expected of a developmental lender, but that's a good thing, and I'm looking forward to the future.
Okay, and do you see the Indigenous Growth Fund potentially as kind of like raising the bar for other entities and out there to say now there's a basis of comparison? So like in my business, I go on a case by case with the First Nations. What is it they want to do? Where would they kind of get matched to the right capital, whether that's private equity or debt financing and that? Do you see this as kind of like upping the standards even for people like me?
Well, I think overall, I think we're all upping each other. I think there's higher expectations of the types of projects we're going to participate on. So we're all going to take more risk. There's going to be more opportunities for entrepreneurs and communities to access capital, and they'll get a good understanding of who to approach. I'll go to Frank for this. I'll go to the AFI for this. I'll go to Raven Capital for this. I'll go to another equity company for this. And I'm really hopeful for the future because I could see more equity companies being created because the capital markets demand that. And we're not too far off from having a global fund as well. Like that's where we're heading, because our Indigenous community of 456 Indigenous people throughout the world are going to be connected in that we're Indigenous, and we want to ensure that our third world conditions are raised to a first world standard.
Awesome. So Frank, maybe a key question maybe many of our viewers might have now is kind of where do we start? Like, how do we begin? Like, how do we begin to access the opportunity here?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I guess it brings us back to our earlier part of the discussion. So if you think about the role that the Indigenous Growth Fund plays, it's really the intermediary between, on the one side, the capital markets and especially in the beginning, federal government and crown corporations, and on the other hand, the Aboriginal financial institutions, which will then on-lend that capital to First Nation, Métis, and Inuit entrepreneurs. So from an entrepreneur perspective, their first step to access this capital would be to find their local AFI, and they can go to the NACCA website to see a list of the AFIs and where they are, and start a conversation with the AFI and say, here's a business plan I'm thinking about. is that something that the AFI can support, and then go through the step of building out that business plan, working with the AFI on an application so that eventually the entrepreneur can access the loan capital from the IGF, and also, if needed, that there are other funding sources that AFIs have access to that could be used to supplement the loan capital as well.
Oh, awesome. So as for our viewers there, visit the website www.nacca.ca. You'll be able to find out where your local AFI location is. There's, I believe, just over 50 across Canada. So if you're not already familiar, that's kind of the place to find it. Alison, you know, we're getting to the end of our time here. How about just a little bit of closing comments from you?
Yeah, no, thanks, Frank. I think I was just thinking with the comments that Shannin and Frank had made earlier, you know, reminds me of most of what our business is on the fund investing side of BDC is we work on a lot of venture capital investing, right? Investing into startups. And one thing that makes, I think is worth pointing out is that most fund managers that we work with, when they work with a startup business, they really know that it's a process of really rolling up your sleeves and working with the founder or the entrepreneur. I think that aspect, we can't underestimate the importance of that. As Shannin said, as we grow the access to capital, we're going to reach out and see more entrepreneurs in the Indigenous community coming forward. They're going to need that kind of value add working alongside the capital. So, you know, I really believe that part of what this fund and what we hope to see is that there is a broader network of resources available to Indigenous entrepreneurs, as they are to entrepreneurs who are sitting in large cities, to be able to have mentorship, you know, have access to acceleration platforms to help them think through their business plans, as Frank said, you know, to help them get that first marketing pitch ready when they're reaching out to customers. I think a lot of that work, which is really critical when you're at the early stages of a new business, we need to see that piece really come on strong as part of this offering. And, you know, that will be done to a certain extent by other programming, but, you know, that's something top of mind for us as we all work together to kind of build out the community of support of how you strengthen the institutional investor engagement, is to make sure that not just the money and the capital's there, but also the support network that all entrepreneurs need to be able to scale up and really access markets the way they need to. And I think that's probably the next stage of discussion we'll all be having.
Thank you, Alison. Frank, any final thoughts for our viewers?
I think, you know, looking back at the last few years of work on this, I'm hoping that, you know, this is as we talked about so many times today, it's a fund, a design that will benefit Indigenous entrepreneurs. You know, when I came here 5 years ago, Shannin and the board, the NACCA board, said, you know, there's one thing that we really want you to focus on. We want you to find additional capital for our entrepreneurs, and I really hope we've designed a tool to do that. But I also hope that, you know, it is something that sparks a conversation in other areas, how maybe new approaches to financing projects can be designed and move away from that traditional government contribution agreement approach. Because I think, you know, as Shannin said, for example, we look at some of our member AFIs are looking a little bit at housing initiatives as well, in particular First Nation on reserve housing. And I look at how the programs that ISC and CMHC are running for that specific segment, how they are designed, and how they often fall short in really providing what they're meant to do, right? Which is provide adequate housing, something very basic, really. And much of that is because they're, you know, their fiscal year end issues, like the same old Ottawa thing is you've got your budget for 1 year, and if you don't spend the money by March 31st, then, you know, that's the end of the project. It forces you into this short-term thinking approach, this okay, let's find an initiative that we can do within a year, and do that, rather than looking at something longer term where you can build success stories over many years. And I'm really hoping that you know, aside from the immediate access to capital for the AFIs and the Indigenous entrepreneurs, that this is maybe something that sparks a conversation how other programs that require capital, how they could be structured differently in a more innovative way to you know, fill the needs that are out there in the community. Back to your comment, Frank, that the communities here in Canada that are just so poor, and where the socioeconomic situation is so dire, and seeing what other ways we can come up with to improve those living conditions.
Thank you, Frank. So Shannin, I'm going to give you the last word here, and I have to really congratulate you on having kind of put all these pieces together. And you know, I remember from the very early stages, you know, when we were all kind of learning about this whole thing years ago, and just how do we do that? But I think this is part of a real fundamental move that we're seeing in the Indigenous community, moving away from kind of constant reliance on government bureaucracies and trying to take those steps to kind of enter what I call the real world, right? So I really have to thank you on behalf of all Indigenous peoples in Canada for all the hard work you've done. I've always considered you a very unsung hero in our First Nations community, and I know from the Mushkegowuk region you come from, you know, it's all about humility and everything, but I do want to kind of uplift you and thank you for the work you've done. And you know, is there anything you'd like to say to our viewers here about this kind of new fund that you've introduced to the marketplace?
No, I think we've talked about the fund in its whole. What I'd like to do is just thank all the people that made it possible, because you have these ideas, and you can't make them roll out unless you have a good team. And I'm very helpful. I'm very thankful for Frank. Jerry Hubner has been a big champion on our team. Alison, thank you so much for your technical assistance on this. Michael Denham, of course, and our board is so important. They were very supportive of this whole process as we were going and creating something brand new. It's always an uncomfortable thing when you're creating something new, because all parties, BDC, NACCA, the government, they're in uncertain ground, and they have to have a certain amount of trust in order to be able to take those new steps. And everybody was able and willing to take those steps, and I'm so grateful for that, because otherwise it just remains an idea and another failed attempt. And I've had a few of those in my career, and I know we've all had those. So it's nice to see something actually roll out and happen, and that it's going to be here after even I'm gone. So this is for our future generations, and I'm so thankful that it's here, and it's a template for others that are viewing this workshop to create other funds. Like we've shown that it's possible, and now the opportunities can be had. So Gishchimingwich, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this initiative has kind of thrown a $150 million pebble in a pond, and I do believe we're going to see some ripples here. So on behalf of the Indigenomics Institute, I'd really like to thank all of our panelists, Shannin Metatawabin, Alison Nankivell, and Frank Richter for participating. And thank you very much to our viewers for taking the time and sharing your most precious resource, part of your life with us. And we hope you learned something. And again, for more information, visit the website, www.nacca.ca. Kichimigwich, Kinanaskobitten, thank you all very much.